Good evening, good morrow, and good day, and welcome to another campaign diary and Q&A here on Slice and Dice with the Many Lands campaign. So today I'm going to be talking about everything that went on in session 17, as well as stuff we've got upcoming for Monday's session. That's Monday Why did I put myself in this situation? I don't know what date it is. Monday the 11th of November, where we'll be picking up with session 18. Got some fun stuff that's very different. Well, there's a couple of new things, basically, is what's coming on the 11th. So I'm very excited for that, which I'll tell you all about that towards the end of the stream. But first of all, to go over what happened in session 17. And before we even do that, I want to give a big thank you for all of our most recent followers, particularly for our most recent followers on Twitch. Those are Crying Zombie, Elf Daughter Crafts, and Jawser. Thank you all so much for following the channel. Really appreciate that. Really means a lot. And hope you're enjoying what you're seeing. We look forward to your feedback. We love hearing from you guys in the chat. So again, thank you for tuning in. And if you haven't done so already and you've been watching any of the campaign so far and you want to see more of it, please hit that follow button. We really do appreciate it. Equally, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're not subscribed to us already, please do so, because on YouTube you can watch all of our videos as they'll be up there for eternity, whereas on Twitch, unfortunately, after a couple of weeks they disappear. So if you want to see the previous episodes at your leisure for the rest of time, tune into our YouTube channel. Equally, we are about to have our first kind of highlight reels coming up. That's my phone not being on silent. There we go. Equally, we have some best bits coming up on our YouTube channel. James has been working away looking at previous episodes and doing a kind of highlight reel of that, and I'll be dropping that on YouTube as soon as that's done, and we should have more of those sort of peppered throughout the channel in the future. That'll be exclusively on YouTube. That won't be up on Twitch. So if you want to see that, head on over to our YouTube channel and you'll find it there. And as I said, subscribe. It means a lot. In regards to session 17, for those of you who watched it live, there was quite a lot of introductory laying down the groundwork, really, because it was essentially the start of the next adventure. As the group have fulfilled their first major sort of plot line, doing the Rat King's lair and then travelling on from there to Hilberg. That was a major point for some of our players, particularly for Marta and for her character Neris, because Neris's ultimate goal has been to get to Hilberg to meet her aunt and uncle for the first time, who she's supposed to stay with for her own safety. And for the rest of the group, things just seem to be moving in that direction. The main plot hook at the moment, the main through thread, is in regards to finding the Lady Helene Grenforth, an ambassador on a philanthropic mission to travel around Burikrin, who Malar was meant to be meeting with, but unfortunately she seems to have been abducted, apparently by members of House Rookwood, or that's the theory anyway, who have seemed to have abducted her due to the fact that a couple of the bodies of her abductors have turned up, and they appear to be junior members of houses from the Crowflies who are in service to, or vassal houses to House Rookwood of the Crowflies. So it seems to be pointing in that direction. So really, quite a bit of this next episode was really establishing a bit more about Hilberg and more to do with just introducing the various sort of landmarks and points of interest within the settlement. So obviously our group very quickly found the inn, as it was right near to the main gate, so that's always helpful, and got chatting to the barkeep there. They've acquired their lodgings for the evening, which is obviously very important. Rest is very important, and in addition to that, they have there's been quite a lot of touching on character backstories and really character development, I would say, in session 17, which for me, I didn't see that coming, a lot of it, so it was really refreshing and interesting. I think it kind of it rounded out our characters a bit more, it rounded out our heroes, and it was an opportunity to hear more about what their goals are and what they're up to. And the first of that came while they were at the inn, as Brucon has been he's made it his goal, and you may have picked this up already if you've read his backstory. If you haven't seen it already, you can find it on our World Anvil page. There's a link to that just down below on Twitch. Also, if you're watching live, you can click on his picture along the Twitch extension, the D&D Beyond Twitch extension. Click on his picture, and then there'll be his stats, and there's also a link then to his entire profile, and you can read his backstory to your heart's content. Anyway, so he has been looking for a certain elixir, the Decanter of Serenity, believing that this will, given that his beliefs, being a monk of the Barkfang Monastery, believes in the balance between light and dark, and believes that this Decanter of Serenity will grant him more calm and placid, and serenity ultimately meaning balance in the universe. And so he's kind of made it his goal to look for that, and that really hadn't been touched on until this particular session, where sort of Bart just dropped it into the conversation with the barkeep, which is an interesting one. It's certainly good to know as a DM what your character's motivations are, but also to then to use that to sort of play into the campaign. And I think going forward, that will certainly influence how Brucon will react with the world, and also react to certain items within that world. So, for instance, in Hilberg, there is in fact an old abandoned brewery. More on that later, because it's been touched on as to why Brucon may be interested in going to the brewery. He's been given a couple of reasons to go there. But the first of all, he was asking about recipes for perhaps getting closer to finding the Decanter of Serenity, and the barkeep kind of said, well, it was cleared in a hurry, in my pseudo Black Country accent, that there may well be stuff there because the previous owners left in a hurry. So again, that's one motivation for him to go there. Then, as they left the inn, they then decided to explore the market and do a bit of shopping. Now, some players don't enjoy shopping too much, and they'd rather just be getting on with the action and so on. I personally really enjoy it. I really enjoy the roleplay side of things, and it's a really nice way of sort of getting to know your characters more and sort of flesh out that world a bit more. And for one thing, it was a great way to reintroduce Phil the Trader, who until this point hadn't been named, but the group had encountered him on the road selling his potions and such. So it was great to kind of call him back into the fold. He was heading in that direction anyway, so I think it was a nice callback for the players to have this character be reintroduced, and much hilarity ensued. They also managed to get a hold of some very helpful potions, so it can't be it's never a bad thing. But this also led on to the general store. Now, they've been given a couple of reasons to visit the general store, one of which being they had acquired, from raiding the manufacturing half-rage, they'd acquired a load of Iskan pentacles, not the common currency in Burikrin. In Burikrin, they use pieces as their currency. And as James has just said on the chat, it's too public to steal from him for a second time, as he did in fact steal from Phil the first time they had met him, but this time being in a market square full of eyes, probably not the best place to start stealing stuff. Although Seth did actually steal a potion from somebody else within the market, and just stole a potion. He doesn't know what it is, but he just nicked one, which was that could be interesting. We'll see how that plays out. In fact, I forgot to write that down, so I will make sure that I do that. Anyway, so introducing the general store Bits and Pieces, or Bits and Pieces, with the two gnomes behind the counter there, brother and sister pairing. Now, obviously, that whole section, they're quite fun characters to play. They've got their own pets, they've got their own quirks and so on. some of you watching may have been wondering why I decided to go with a French accent for those two characters. And the simple answer is it was fun, but the more in-depth answer would be that so they are supposed to originate from Loranlas, which is a forest nation to the east of the Many Lands. So it's a nation amongst the trees, and it's very much in touch with the Fae and the Feywild. They hold the Fae in high regard. They treat them basically like demigods. And portals to the Feywild open up in Loranlas at certain points in the year, just randomly. They're not entirely sure when. So my sort of thinking, my influence on the style for Loranlas had a kind of French European style in mind for their society and the way they dress and so on, and that was kind of further not placated. It was further compounded by the fact that Leoberin and Marshall had chosen for Leoberin to be dressed rather regally, being that he was a courtier character with a ruff and so on. I thought it slotted in nicely with that setting. So that's why I made the artistic decision for the brother and sister Bantom and Belle Quigley to be French, at least Frenchified in their accent. Just a little nod for you there, a little bit of a tidbit. But this was good fun because one thing that you can never anticipate for is what Fleeting Look's going to do and how Dan plays him. It's very hard to know what he's going to do a lot of the time because his motivations are kept. He plays his cards very close to his chest right up until the moment that he puts things into action, and that was certainly the case this week. As the general store is proud of its selection of clothing, again kind of leaning into the French fashion la mode kind of cliche, and yes, bloody fleeting, and so he was directed to go to the general store because he wanted to purchase a hat for Seth, because he kind of fanboys over Seth and thinks that he's great, but they have a very strange relationship. It's been a lot of fun to see, and so that's been further kind of built on this week. So he decided he wanted to buy a new hat for Seth, as Seth had left his back in Half-Rage and hasn't been able to go back there to collect it, along with some other items. And he decided he wanted to get the hat embroidered with a little personal message written on the inside, and of course the gnomes were all too accommodating for that. It comes with a price, of course, but you know, they were happy to do that. With the I've actually written it down because you know I had to write it down. Dear Seth, now I will always be above you, from Fleeting. So that's going to be in his hat that he's wearing. It's his genius. And it was very good fun for the table at the time. It's just another little bit to do with the general store. So yeah, after much shopping, much to DK's dismay, as he's not a big fan of shopping, a lot of things that kind of came up outside of just buying items. We learned more about our characters, about our heroes during that exchange, and I think that's why I think that shopping interludes and non-combat situations are fun and definitely have a place in D&D, because we learnt, for instance, about Leoberin. So Leoberin being a man from Loranlas himself, from a wealthy family. In fact, his family are on the High Council within Loranlas. Leo didn't want anyone to know this. Now, I personally, as a DM, didn't know that either. I didn't know that Leoberin didn't want anyone to know where he's come from. And so these two gnomes, being from Loranlas themselves, recognised immediately by his dress that this was an important figure from that area. Plus, they could speak Sylvan to him, which is the language of Loranlas and of the Feywild as well. So, funny enough. So when Leoberin was like, please don't tell anyone, quite a shock, quite an interesting development for that character. You kind of wonder, well, what's his game? What's he doing? He's in the last episode we saw him finally receive his Pact of the Tome, finally receive his tome for the Pact of the Tome, and so we kind of got a little bit of a glimpse into his warlock abilities and where they've come from, and so he seems to be keeping everything on the hush hush. But what we know so far of Leo Bryn is that he is trying to prove himself as a hero, and the reason for that yet to be revealed. There may be some hints of it in his backstory. Again, you can check that out on the Twitch extension, on the D&D Beyond Twitch extension. But so far that hasn't been revealed to the group, and you know, I respect that, and we want to keep that private, so I won't divulge too much into that. So moving on from the general store, we then kind of got to explore even more of Hilberg, and really the reason why they were looking to explore was they're trying to find a particular man who is rumoured to have sold his ox and cart recently to a group of adventurers who supposedly had a statue with them in tow. Now, this obviously points towards the abductors of Lady Helene Grenforth, and so that is the kind of main thrust for our group currently, their main motivation. They want to see this through and find the Lady Helene and save her. So hearing people matching the description of her abductors, and in fact her in her statue form after being after coming under the basilisk's eye, being turned to stone, they have been looking for this courier by the name of Dean Fringe, and apparently he's been flaunting his newfound wealth from selling his cart for a lot more than it was worth, and equally from apparently a previous job before that when he arrived back in town, as he was paid a lot of money, he was paid handsomely by a knight to deliver Goodbury wine from Halfreach all the way to Rackfell Manor. The group haven't learned yet where Rackfell Manor is, but what I can tell you is that it is outside of Runedire. In fact, it's actually further in the foothills. It's more towards Delvator. It's quite some way away anyway, Rackfell Manor, and the group have so that's what they've heard about Dean so far. So apparently he's made a lot of money, and he's sometimes worked for bits and pieces for the gnomes, for Bantam and Bell Quigley, and they in fact revealed that Dean had bought various items from them, because they also stock magical items, mostly magical clothing, that included a ring of feather falling and and the boots of speed were the two main items they flagged up that he had bought, along with some various expensive, elegant silken robes and the like. So that was their main point of inquiry. From talking to one slightly dodgy seller in the market square, a halfling who was selling counterfeit goods, basically pretending things were magic items when they weren't. Doesn't really work when you've got a warlock who has detect magic on tap. So yeah, in this case it definitely didn't work, him trying to pull the wool over their eyes, selling various items to them and then having to give them back. But they were told that there was rumours from, in fact, one of the weaponsmiths who was in the market square, that there are certain nefarious individuals belonging to a group of sort of thieves and the like, and hinted that they may well meet somewhere within the town. Seth was pointed towards this halfling, who then in Thieves' Cant communicated that essentially his group meets at the mill, and there is somebody that they may want to talk to at the church, at the Temple of the Eight. So following that, the group then head towards the temple. I mean, you don't need to give Deacon Malar Shadecreek much encouragement to go to a temple. They decided to go there again, meeting more colourful characters, meeting Ventrix II, the priest of the temple, a brass dragonborn, a very passionate and kind of animated brass dragonborn, and also his assistant, Deacon Brian, whose last name has not been revealed yet because Malar couldn't remember it. Apparently they had studied together back in the Hammerfern Institute, and so rolling a history check, not doing so well, meant I couldn't reveal his full name, but so far he's called Brian, and he's quite a large man. As well as that, with Rexland Swordclaw, the member of the Black Dragonborn member of the Order of the Broken Fang, reappearing in Hilberg after being told that the way was clear for him to speak to his contact about potentially a monstrous threat in the vicinity. He comes back and warns the party that there apparently is a werewolf on the loose, and Seth and James, somewhat cannily, slots two plot hooks together and says, okay, well, apparently this wolf may well be the same person who abducted the Lady Helene. If you help us, you'll find your werewolf. Very clever. And he convinced Rexland very much so. So he accompanied them to the temple. And when they got there, finally, we had the opportunity, despite Seth trying to stop it happening, for Fleeting Look to finally take his oath. Because what I have explained in previous campaign diaries is that when you're given those kind of beats in character development from the player's handbook, so I'm looking at the Paladin and their oath, why not, instead of when they reach level 3 just go, okay, you have an oath, off you go, make it into a section, make it into an actual event. You know, taking an oath is a big deal, make it into a ceremony, make a characterful kind of feature out of it, and that is basically what we did. So end up with Rexland performing this ceremony for Fleeting to then take his oath and become a Paladin of Vengeance. And it was a good moment. I think it really demonstrated it gave us a bit more of an insight into what a paladin is expected to do, or at least what a paladin of vengeance is meant to do. I think that kind of grounded it more for Dan, and similarly for Fleeting, that this is the undertaking, this is what I must do. And also the rather large hint there that the gods can in fact take away your powers if you're not doing things in line with the 8. Then the 8 can remove their powers from you. They can test you. The gods can test us. So a little bit of a reference for the future there if things start to go a bit awry. Because paladins, you gotta respect your god, and you gotta be doing things with your god in mind, because that's where you're channeling your divine powers from. So if you upset the deity that is giving you those powers, they can be taken away. In the same way as with a warlock, if you piss off your patron could easily just rip up the contract, or you could be in fact, even worse, you could be voiding your own contract, because a warlock signs a contract with a patron, they sign a pact. Equally, those powers can be just taken away. It's an important thing to bear in mind, and I think that as a DM, it's good to keep those things in mind, like keep the tabs on those players, because that is legitimately a thing that can happen. That is a legitimate threat. Not condoning actually doing it unless there is severe reason to, of course, but just to kind of take those mechanics of that build, of that class, and use it in a way that would make sense in the world. I think it just adds another layer to your game. The other revelation in the church following Fleeting taking his oath was him revealing just casually that he, as there was a lot of talk about the gods, Fleeting Look revealed part of his backstory. Had no idea he was going to do this. I knew it was in the backstory. We talked about it together, but I had no idea it was going to come in conversation. But he just says outright that he met one of the gods, that he met Ominak just in the forest and talked to him, and apparently his friends call him Keith. And this was a lovely moment, because you have Malar Shade Creek, a cleric, a man who's devoted his life to the gods, to the service of the 8, for the entirety of his life. He may have got the slightest of signals that the gods are listening, or that the gods are present, in the same way that you could argue a pious individual or a religious person would see in real life, that you see hints and subtle changes that just let you know that somebody's watching over you, for instance, or that you read into certain events and read that it's the god, that read into it that perhaps the gods are behind this, pulling the strings. And so to have somebody who has only those slightest murmurings, the slight ripples of the god's influence, to then be confronted by another person who has full on just had a conversation with them as if they were a bloke from down the pub. you could just see. I think that DK relished the moment, but just seeing in his face as Malar just being completely stunned, completely paralyzed with this confusion and this sheer sort of, it throws the book out the window essentially for him. Everything that he has been believing in and that he has preached about all this time, suddenly something comes along, it completely changes things. So it's going to be interesting to see how that relationship develops between Malar and between Fleeting Look. Fleeting Look is skeptical about whether the gods actually exist and if they actually have any power, and yet he's met one of them in the flesh, so to speak. Very, very strange, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that relationship builds between those two characters. So following that, the group then head back to the inn to reconvene and decide what they're going to do next. They know that they need to find this. They've got to find this Dean Fringe, and they know that when people come into a lot of money, they tend to flaunt their money, spending it on all of the luxuries. So he's already bought a load of clothes. One of the other things it seems reasonable to do is to go and spend a lot of money on expensive food and drink. So they head back to the inn in the hopes that they can find some kind of lead on Dean. And as while they're there, they notice a lot of dwarves in the corner, and it's here that they find, in addition to Teenin, one of the twin dwarves who'd gone off ahead, who was originally a bodyguard for Lady Helene, who had gone off ahead of the group with his brother to Hilberg. They find him surrounded by these Fairfan cultists. For those of you who don't know yet, because I haven't talked to them a lot about it, so Fairfan is supposedly the dwarven creator god, the dwarven god of creation, and he is sort of he's meant to be basically the linchpin of a monotheistic religion, that being the creation collective. The characters so far, the dwarves, have been known as the Fairfan cultists. So Fairfan cultists are exclusively dwarves who believe in the one god, Fairfan. They don't believe in the eight. They reject the idea of 8 gods. They reject polytheism. They believe there is one god, and it was a dwarf named Fairfan who founded the dwarven race under the mountains. And so they essentially are looking to discredit the 8, but they're also looking to find Fairfan, to find evidence of him, and to exhort his will over the many lands. That is their ultimate goal. So they're very devout, and they're quite aggressive in their preaching. And so this had already been seeded by the fact that Teenin is a cleric when the party freed him of the stone that he'd been turned into via the basilisk. He was always saying, "Thank Fairfan for that," and he had a symbol of Fairfan on his neck, and it seems to be that his powers derive from Fairfan. So naturally, him arriving in this town where there are a bunch of people, bunch of dwarves, all worshipping Fairfan, for him it's like he's arrived. He feels like he belongs as part of that group, and this meant that his investigations into Lady Helene got somewhat sidetracked, while his brother Turin, although not the sharpest tool in the shed, had to kind of carry on the investigations on his own. Fortunately, Turin actually did find a lead, but we'll get on to that momentarily. So Teenin, being sort of lured in by this cult, essentially, has been spending time with them and hasn't really got much in terms of evidence. But then Seth kind of uses that against him, and I thought it was quite clever how James did this, by basically using Teenin, using guilt to kind of lever these supposedly pious individuals to help them in their search for Lady Helene. And actually, they eventually agree to do that. They take some convincing, though, and the main condition well, they originally wanted to get a hold of Fleeting Look's hammer, as they recognise that looks like to be some kind of relic of Fairfan, and in fact it is called Fair's Storm. I think Dan has already made the connection that hammer may well belong to Fairfan, and so it's no wonder that those cultists want to get a hold of it. But once that failed, they then took solace in the fact that they convinced Brucon, the only dwarf in the party, to come to their next to the next meeting of Fairfan, which supposedly will be at the brewery in a couple of days' time. So, in being able to convert somebody over to the way of Fairfan as opposed to any other religion, they're happy to assist in looking for Lady Helene. So, again, it's dark dealings with some shady people. But speaking of shady people, one other thing I forgot to mention at the temple was that so Ventrix II, the priest at the temple, very passionate about giving people a second chance, and that's why he has the nickname the Second. He particularly has this compassion towards and sympathy towards Dragonborn, because Dragonborn currently are treated almost as second-class citizens because a lot of them it's believed that they could be spies from the Dragonborn kingdom of Rachir, which is the neighbour of Burikrin. They're currently locked in a bit of a cold war. So they're not treated particularly well, and the Dragonborn characters that the party have come across have all seemed to have been singing from this hymn sheet so far. One such Dragonborn that had been taken in and had been working along at the temple was not named, but apparently just was homeless and was there in like just a burlap cloak and hoods, like, you know, very poor, very modest clothing. Anyway, this just turns out that this is a Copper Dragonborn, and it just so happens to be the same Copper Dragonborn that escaped from the prison wagon along with Seth at the very beginning. Whoa! Mind blown! So another callback from much earlier in the campaign. And in fact, she appears to also be working with this group of thieves and spies that seem to have regular meetings at the mill. Turns out that that group is in fact called the Moonrunners, and it is an organisation of thieves and so on who operate throughout Burikrin and beyond. And it just so happens that she is a member of this particular chapter, which is the Rakgarut chapter of the Moonrunners. The Rakgarut chapter basically is all of the smaller settlements along the outside the Rakgarut Mountains. That's why it's called that. There are other chapters which have not been touched on yet, but essentially all of the main settlements. So Rundar, the capital, has its own chapter of the Moonrunners. Delvator would have it. Morninil, perhaps even Hamathen, and Kalas certainly has its own chapter of the Moonrunners there. So it's a big organisation that's used to do some very questionable things, and they probably still do, but one of the more noble things that they're doing is they're assisting, or at least in their mind, noble things that they're doing, is assisting refugees getting over the border from Rachir to Burikrin and vice versa. So it was lovely having that callback to Seth, and that horn that he's been carrying around for the longest time finally has been able to give that back to her. There are a couple of items that he has which also belong to her, which he managed to acquire from the evidence chest in the prison caravan when he escaped from that. But you know, he'll find out more about those later. So from looking for Dean Fringe, it seems to things seem to have the trail seemed to have gone cold until Turin had came back to the group and said that apparently somebody matching his description had been seen in Half-Light Forest. He didn't know if it was within the whether it was very recently. He knows it was within the last day, but he didn't know much more than that. So with this flimsy bit of information, the group decide to head into the forest to go look for Dean. And as they do so, they go past the lumber mill, which I really didn't have time to talk much about, but we'll talk more about that next time. And they get quite far into the forest, like it's far enough that you can't see where the edge is, that deep into the forest, when Malar spots a pile of clothes in a little clearing within the forest. Now, the pile of clothes, surprise, surprise, matches the description of Dean Fringe. It was a mustard yellow silken shirt, so that was quite recognisable. And then once he finds this, the group are then surrounded essentially by a pack of wolves and their leader, a fearsome direwolf, a very large wolf. Seems to be a bit of a standoff at first, and potentially if the party, if Malar had done better on his animal handling check, or if one of the party had been able to speak with animals in some way, that situation might not have ended up in a fight. They may well have ended up in them asking to part ways, or perhaps even pertaining some other information. Giving some other information pertaining to where Dean Fringe is. But alas, that was not to be. So they ended up in a bit of a brawl, which ended very quickly because Leobrin, once the wolves had been sufficiently injured, Leobrin just used the sleep spell Genius, put the direwolf and two of the other wolves to sleep. Also put Brucon to sleep as well. Unfortunate, but then he was awoken by the final wolf that wasn't put to sleep, biting him. That woke him up pretty quickly. And we basically left the session right there. We were sort of pressed for time, but it leaves things in an interesting place because they defeat the wolves, but three of them are still alive. They're just asleep for a minute, as that's how long the spell lasts, I think. I have to double check that. Could be an hour, which would be a lot easier. And something shiny within the pile of clothes catches Malar's eye. Now remember, there were two magical items that supposedly Dean had. One of those was the Boots of Speed, and the other was the Ring of Feather Falling. So I wonder which one of those that may well be in that pile of clothes. But where this leaves us for next time is that the group will naturally be going back into Hilberg. I don't think there's anything more they will find in the forest. See if they can find Dean. And I hope they do go back to Hilberg, because that is kind of what I've got lined up to then introduce our first ever guest star on the stream. So a friend of mine who's a massive improviser, really good in that stuff, and massively into D&D as it turns out as well, will be joining us for the next few sessions with his character, and you can see a couple of details actually on the D&D Beyond Twitch extension. It's Howland Cragmere. So I won't reveal much on how he's going to be introduced, because of course that could change. It really depends on the party. I might have to change things on the fly to make it work. But essentially we're going to be introducing him, and we're also going to be finding out more about this werewolf, and more about Dean Fringe himself as well. One thing that the party haven't done yet, which they may well want to do, is look into his house and see what they can find there pertaining to where he's gone, or in fact might have more information about where the cart has gone, who he sold it to. He may have written something down, perhaps. Might not have done, but there may well be some information at his house. Or else they just need to find him, and they need to find him quickly. They also need to be careful, because night is approaching. As we said, there is a werewolf on the loose. Two different things going on at the same time could be interesting. And also, in addition to that, in a couple of days' time, something's going to happen at that old brewery, and are the party going to be there to see it? Who knows? Generally, it's just so the Fairfang cultists meet at the old brewery. They haven't said whether they meet regularly. They just said they are in a couple of days' time. But we'll see how that transpires in later episodes, as they are definitely going to be causing trouble in the town. It's already been documented by Ventrix that they protest outside the temple. And once the group come across members of the Republic Guard at Hilberg, I'm sure even more stuff about the cultists and so on will be revealed. So I've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline ready to go, and there's some that is, well, a lot of it is up here, not a lot of it is written down, so I'm going to have to be doing a bit of that in preparation next week. But look forward to that. And also on Monday, in addition to having our first ever guest star on the stream, the other fun and exciting thing we've got coming up is we have our second giveaway. That's right. I can give you a little bit of a sneak peek now as to what we'll be giving away. It's something within this box, this little bag here. It may be D&D dice, it may not be. And all I can tell you is that it's courtesy of our friends at Beholder's Gaze. We're going to be running a giveaway. There'll be the ways to enter will be exactly the same as before. So it'll be during the stream. If you write in the chat, I'll give the word for that later on when we actually start the competition, and we'll also be announcing it on social media as well. So we'll get a hold of some cool prizes. You better be tuning in on Monday at 6 p.m. here on the channel. Until then, guys, have a great weekend and stay safe.